So Michigan and Alabama play an absolute thriller in the Rose Bowl. I mean, all of us hoped that these games would be really good. And when the playoff came down, a lot of us were saying, myself included, that we thought that these matchups really could be epic matchups. And that this was part of the reason of why the four teams that they included were included, is because these were going to be the best matchups. And these were the best teams and are the best teams in the country. And so here's the Michigan team comes in undefeated. Alabama comes in after beating Georgia, ending a 29-game winning streak to the back-to-back national champions. And they played an unreal football game. Now, was it sloppy at times? Yes. Was it the perfect game? No. But man, that was entertaining. You know, for anybody that loves the sport, that was an incredible watch. Now, being there was obviously, you know, I mean, I guess I don't want to rub it in, but like it was phenomenal. That setting with the sun setting, you know, behind the San Gabriels and the flyover and the colors and it was incredible. And Michigan ends up winning the game. Michigan beats Alabama. Now they roll into that game favored, and yet I know they're going to play kind of the disrespect card and the nobody believed in us card. Heck, they could probably say that about me. I mean, officially, I picked Alabama in the game, but Michigan wins the game and ends up really doing to Alabama what they've done to a lot of teams this year, which is kind of squeeze the life out of them in a lot of respects. And I'm going to get to all of that in just a moment. But let me start by saying that in order to beat Alabama, and maybe this is a different version of Alabama than we've seen over the last few years. And you know what? Fair enough. However, to beat any Alabama team under Nick Saban, it usually takes, now maybe not all the time, but usually takes a pretty clean game by your team and really good quarterback play. And if you get those two things, it's like, okay, then if you can match up and if you're talented enough and if you're physical enough, then you can maybe create some spots where you can get some wins and actually go win the football game. But it's tough. It's incredibly tough. And we've seen that time and time again. Even when Georgia has beaten them, like it's tough to do. And so when I'm prepping for this game and I'm seeing what Michigan has done against Iowa and what Alabama has done against Georgia, I didn't see this coming. And in particular, the way that it played out. And that's because like Michigan didn't play a clean game at all. At all. They got thoroughly beaten in the special teams. They gave Alabama a couple of short fields that ended up being touchdown scores on those ensuing drives. Normally, when that happens, the Tide doesn't lose. They just don't. They just don't. They capitalize on opponents' mistakes about as well as anybody. And because they generally play a clean game, but they also made a lot of mistakes. Now, maybe they weren't as egregious as some of the Michigan mistakes, but man, some of the negative plays on offense, whether it be the inability to protect the passer or the weird snaps that were an issue for Jalen Milroe the entire game, like it was clear that Alabama was going to have a hard time driving the length of the field and scoring a touchdown on what has largely been the best defense in college football. So Michigan does not play clean. And think of some of the issues that they had on special teams. They had the muffed punt that led to an Alabama touchdown. They had the botched extra point, which loomed large and the only reason we went to overtime. They had the missed field goal. They had another near disaster on the fumbled punt. Another muffed punt. Right before they ended up just taking a knee, they call timeout just to get another chance, just some chance at the end of the game, end up muffing that punt. And all of a sudden they're, inside their own 1 yard line. Meanwhile, Bama's special teams were tremendous. Reichard, 2 field goals from 50 plus. Their punt team was incredible. In fact, 5 punts down to inside the 20 yard line, including a 49 net average. So it's like, do I normally come on this podcast and talk a lot about special teams? No, I don't. But what you have to realize is like Alabama thoroughly beat Michigan at what has tended to be, and certainly was for the entirety of this year, a real strength for Michigan, which was the special teams. And if you would have told me that before the game, I would have said, nope, Michigan's not overcoming that and winning the game. The other part of teams that end up beating Alabama under Nick Saban is that their quarterback plays really well. And up until the last series, I wouldn't have said that that was the case with J.J. McCarthy. There was a lot of missed throws. In particular, the first snap of the game, that was weird, where he basically throws an interception, ends up being out of bounds so that it's not an interception. That was a start that he wants to forget. He settled down a little bit, still wasn't clean and great during the course of the game, but showed up late. More on that in a little bit. So what ends up happening then? So, like, how do you win? How do you overcome those miscues? How do you overcome the fact that the quarterback wasn't tremendous through the majority of the game, or that the special teams was a real hindrance, not even weak, but like a hindrance during the course of the game? Here's how. Defensive line play. Defensive line play. College football this time of year is always about defensive line play. And it rings true again today. Think about this. Michigan's defensive line had 10 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. Thoroughly dominated Alabama. Not even close. Okay, I know I didn't watch the broadcast, but I was there, and the line of scrimmage was not even close. The Michigan defense took it to Alabama at the line of scrimmage. Now, Alabama created some things, namely with quarterback run with Jalen Milroe, which we talked about being an issue for the Michigan defense. But that was never going to be sustainable long term because they couldn't throw it, because they couldn't protect. Not even close. They couldn't handle the blitzing and the structure of blitzing that Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator from Michigan, was bringing. They couldn't handle the stunts from the defensive line. They couldn't handle the overall rush. And again, there might not be a singular great pass rusher for Michigan, but as a collective, they're as good of a pass rush as there is in college football. That Michigan defense held out Alabama to a season low of 288 total yards. Meanwhile, on the other side, Michigan's offensive line did a really good job against the Tide up front. Alabama only had 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack. So when you're talking about disruptive plays, drive-killing plays, Michigan was gaining them. Alabama wasn't on the defensive side. And that's a kudos to that defensive line. And think about it. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to just sit back and think of, oh, okay, so like who's actually won the national championship the last few years? Who's actually been a great team the last few years? Well, the teams with the best defensive lines. It rings true every season. And in this season, the best defensive line in the country happens to be Michigan. They're the deepest, and they're the best. They're the most physical. You don't generally run the football on them. Again, Alabama ran for 172 yards. That's what the stat sheet will say. But it was basically Milroe. And it was basically quarterback design runs or scrambles. And there were a couple of those in there as well. Milroe, he was really going to be the only offense for them. They got a little running game going, but they weren't throwing it. There was no separation in the secondary. The secondary for Michigan just totally locked up Alabama. They had no ability to create separation. So the defense and the defensive line in particular, they negated all the other things that were happening. And normally, you don't beat Alabama unless you play clean and you got great quarterback play. But normally, you don't dominate Alabama at the line of scrimmage like Michigan did today. And I know you're probably listening to this on the day after, so I'm recording this. I keep saying today, but that's what it was for me today. That defensive line was incredible, and they are the best in the country. So what happens is, like, now, because of all the mistakes going back and forth, it becomes a great battle. And in the third quarter, it really looks like Bama's going to come back and win that football game. And they grab the lead, and they're starting to win the line of scrimmage now. And you get this sense like maybe the clock has struck midnight on the Michigan Wolverines. Maybe it's just not going to happen for them. And lo and behold, their defensive line started playing better. And then they finally now, in the course of now you're talking about the history of Harbaugh at Michigan, had a player that can walk on the field inside of 5 minutes, down in the fourth quarter, and drive the team the length of the field to win. I've covered Michigan for quite a while now. And in fact, I did Jim Harbaugh's first game. and it was a game at Utah. And there's been a lot of constants for Michigan football outside of the COVID year in which they struggled, but they're going to be physical. They're going to be tough. They play, generally speaking, cleaner, in particular on the special teams, than they did in the Rose Bowl. But it's like it's kind of the same team. They're going to do things the right way. It's going to be tough to score on them. They're going to play quality defense. They're going to be physical. And then they've morphed and they've adjusted schematically, in particular on defense, and they've done some really good things over the years. But there's always been that element of like, well, but what happens if you get into a game where it's like you have to have it and you're down in the second half? And it's like, well, they don't have that element. So if they can squeeze you to death early, and if they can just run the football, and if they can just play Michigan ball, then they're going to be fine. But guess what? They weren't in that situation in the Rose Bowl. So now it goes back to that giddy feeling that Michigan fans had when J.J. McCarthy signed with Michigan as a high school recruit. Because it's like, oh man, we're getting a 5-star quarterback. Maybe we could have the guy that walks onto the field that can create a score when we need it. And lo and behold, what happens? Under 5 minutes, JJ walks on the field. They haven't done much at all in the second half offensively, and yet they're able to drive the length of the field, make great plays, and score a touchdown to tie the game. That's the difference. That's the difference. Okay, they didn't have that even 2 years ago. You know, all due respect to Cade McNamara. They didn't have the team on the defensive line like they do last year. And that's why like they couldn't squeeze the life out of TCU. And now you're putting it all together where you've got the boa constrictor, and yet you still have the ability with a quarterback to go out there and win the game. And give a ton of credit to the guys making the plays on the outside. Blake Corum had a great game. The offensive line did a great job, for the most part, all day of opening up lanes, in particular on the edge when they were running outside, some of the creative outside runs. They gave McCarthy some time. I thought Sharon Moore did some creative things, and then they got to the crossing routes late in the game. So the best thing in the passing game that they did the entirety of the game, and again, I didn't watch it on the broadcast. I watched just up from the stands, and I could tell like they were running a version of the like bracket man style defense that Saban really loves. That's why some of those crossing routes were open, and some of them were zone, some of them were man. But like generally speaking, the crossing routes were open, whether it was deep overs or shallow crosses, or even those drag routes, the slide routes from the backfield, whether it was running backs or the wide receivers. And those were open for the majority of the game. And that's exactly where Sharon Moore went to. And this is what I love about a young play caller that has creativity but didn't get too cute in the big moments. He went directly to what was working that day, which was those crossing routes. And he's able to, even in the biggest call of the game on fourth down, he gets that little slide route to Blake Corum. He gets a big deep over route to Roman Wilson on a catch that I thought was tremendous. Lo and behold, it looked kind of awkward and like a great catch from the stands. I didn't realize it was tipped, and it was. But he goes, Sharon Moore, the play caller, to the things that were working for the majority of the day, and they drive the length of the field, and JJ makes the plays, and they're able to get into the end zone. And now, in my mind, I'm like, well, Jim's going to go for it. They're going to go for it. I'm kind of getting like caught up in the moment. And then after the fact, he kicks the extra point, and I'm like, well, of course. He's got the better team. The better team was Michigan. And in a lot of ways, you negate the ability of Alabama's special teams to impact the game in the punt game because there are no punts in overtime. And that was the weakest part that Michigan had and the strongest part that Alabama had. And yeah, I get it. You might have to kick a field goal here or there in overtime, but extending the game, all it does is allows Jim Harbaugh to put what he feels like at that moment, and he's not wrong, which is putting the better team on the field for more snaps. That defensive line was going to continue to win, and then they win. It was abundantly clear in the stadium that Jalen Milroe was going to get the ball on fourth down. I know that there's a lot of talk about the play call and this or that. Could they have called something different? Sure. I mean, you can always call something different. If it doesn't work, it's a bad call. If it works, you're the smartest coach and you're going to get a raise. That's just the way that it goes. I will just tell you, it was abundantly clear that they couldn't throw the ball, even on the plays that they were trying to get outside of the pocket. Everyone's like, get them outside of the pocket. Those didn't work all day long. The entire second half, they were trying to slide him out of the pocket. There was nowhere to throw the football. So Bama, in that respect, went to the things that did have success. So what did they call on fourth down? Exactly what had gotten them in that position in the first place, which was quarterback run. And they didn't get it. And Michigan was ready for it. I think the last big piece of credit needs to go to Rod Moore, the safety for Michigan, because he made that tackle on Jalen Milroe on the 15-yard run in overtime. It looked from my vantage point like it was going to break open for a touchdown. Rod Moore gets him down to the ground, lives to snap it another day, and they ended up getting the stop. And so now Michigan is going to go play for the national championship. Jim Harbaugh is going to play for the national championship. And Bama is going to lose. Saban had won his last 6 semifinal games that he was in, but not this time. And that was a classic, folks. That was a classic. And I guess all said and done, Michigan was the team in the Rose Bowl that they were for the majority of the season. And Alabama was in the Rose Bowl the team that they were for the majority of the regular season. And in that respect, the better team won the Rose Bowl. For 1 week, Bama beating Georgia, Michigan not playing great against Iowa, it looked like it was going to flip. And because those were the last games that we saw, I mean, it spooked me. Obviously, that's why I picked Alabama. That's why I picked Alabama. But Michigan wins the game. And big credit to them. I thought that they did a great job. Jesse Minter's got to be awfully proud, defensive coordinator. And Michigan will go to Houston and play for the national championship. And who will they play? The Washington Huskies. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. And you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.